how do you decide what videos to make? Is it solely based on, like things that get sent to you, like sponsorships, or is it stuff that you're just interested in buy and so you do a video on that? Or I guess how do you decide what kind of videos to make?
That's a good question. So today is very different than last year or the year before. Today is I do have a lot of sponsored contents from big brands that send me products. So it depends how interesting the product is. But if I want to put that aside and talk about organically what videos or content I decide to make, what products I decide to purchase, it's a very tricky question. One that I can't claim I've found an answer to, but I can tell you what I try to do. I try to find, there's a gap between some demand and low supply. And that's very tricky because choosing a product with no demand, well, obviously that's not going to go anywhere. But then choosing a product with a lot of supply, and when I say supply of, reviews out there, is also not going to, for me, a channel of my size, it's not going to do good because, I'm a very small fish relatively today, swimming in an ocean of blue whales. And if I want to review the latest iPhone, for example, everyone and their mother is reviewing that iPhone. So when all
Right.
those big whales are putting out content, the algorithm is not going to push mine. So this is where I try to find that gap between some demand but low supply. Now, when I say low supply, there's three different, say, tactics that I try to look at. So the first one is obviously a product itself that does not have a lot of content out there, but these are rare to find. If there's a product that's interesting to people, often there's a lot of content around it. The second thing is timing. If I am the first or amongst the first to review something, then at that point in time, there's low supply of that. And I actually have an interesting story on that. I think it was about 2 years ago. I was watching the keynote of the Samsung Galaxy Buds 2 Pro, and right after the keynote, pre-orders open. I placed a pre-order, and they were supposed to ship out in about a week or 2 weeks. That was on a Wednesday. Friday morning, my doorbell rings. FedEx hands me a package, and that's the Galaxy Buds 2 Pro.
3 days later?
2 days later, actually, yeah. And I'm
Oh,
like,
wow.
what? Seriously? So I jump on YouTube and I search for reviews, and there was absolutely no reviews out there. So I'm like, that's a golden
Wow.
opportunity. So I took a day off from my job, and I spent the entire day working on that review until 4 a.m. At 4 a.m., I finished the review. I posted the review. I went to bed, got a few hours of sleep, woke up in the morning, and had a few thousand views. Normally, that would take me a couple of months. That was the first time I had a video that went, I'd say, viral to a certain degree, but viral with respect to my previous content and my channel. And in the first week, I got about 40,000 views.
Wow.
My channel average for content within the first 7 days was less than 100, and I had 40,000 views. So that was out of this world. I still remember it was surreal. I would open the YouTube app 100 times a day and just, pull it down to refresh just to see the numbers
Yeah.
jump by a couple of hundred every time I refresh. So that was great, but that was short-lived. I talk about the whales and me being a small fish because about a week later, all the big YouTubers out there had their content out, and slowly but surely, my video went from being the number one video on YouTube search, Google search, Reddit, wherever you search, my video would pop up. It went from there to disappearing completely, and it was no longer, even though it had about 40, 50,000 views at that point, it was no longer pushed out because all those big YouTubers already had their content. So that is an opportunity as well, and I've had a few of those whereby low supply by virtue of being first or amongst the first to produce something. And then the third, let's say, tactic is trying to find a unique angle for a review of a product that is in, even if it's in a lot of supply. So iPhone, for example. If I just put out a review of the latest iPhone, I'm not going to get it. Actually, I did do that. I did review, I think it was the iPhone 15. I think it got
Hmm.
400 views in like 2 years. That's nothing.
Yeah.
But also, I found a unique angle with the iPhone 14 Pro Max. So, and I drew on a personal story there. Prior to me buying the 14 Pro Max, I had the smaller version, the non-Max version.
Hmm.
And when the Pro Max came out, I really wanted to get it, but I was concerned it might be too big, it might be too heavy. It might be annoying in your pocket. I had a lot of concern. And then I got it. And for a few weeks, I used both the smaller one and the larger one. And that's the angle I did my content around. It wasn't a review of the iPhone. It was, I think I called it iPhone 14 Pro Max, too big, question mark. And that was it. So I completely tackled that angle for people who are thinking of getting it, but are afraid it might be too big. And that review, I think it got like 80, 90,000 views, even though it was about the iPhone. But the angle that I took was in low supply. That's why it did well. I have another story actually, which had a big learning lesson for me around that unique angle. I was looking at AR glasses, and at the time there were three main, players in the market, and we talked about YouTube content not answering all my questions. Well, I couldn't get an answer which one was better. I wanted to personally purchase one for myself, and I could not find answers to which of these three are better. So I bought all three, and I did a video comparing all three. It wasn't a dedicated review on any of the individual ones, just my thoughts comparing all three. The interesting bit is I did that over Christmas break. So I was visiting family. I was away from my studio. I did not have my camera, my microphone, my lighting. I had nothing of my setup. I just had my iPhone and a pretty poor quality wireless microphone that was sent to me years back. Terrible quality. So I shot that video in my sister's living room, actually. Production value was terrible. This became my highest grossing video of all time. I think I have about 250,000 views on that video so far. And there's a very interesting lesson here that, fancy equipment doesn't really matter. What matters is your content. I'm shooting right now with, equipment worth thousands of dollars. I shot the other one with my iPhone and a crappy microphone. It did better than every other video I've done. So that's an interesting eye opener for me there in that experience.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Those are some great stories. Thanks for sharing that. I'm curious. So you mentioned that you do get some sponsorships now that your channel's a little bit bigger. When you do get an offer to do a video on a sponsored product, do you do research on that product and kind of see if there is a gap for that content, or do you solely base it on like the offer that the company is giving you?
That's a good question. It's a combination of both. So the first thing is I need to actually believe in the product. Otherwise, I'm not going to review it. So I need to
That makes
have
sense.
some sort of conviction that it's a good product. Otherwise, it's not going to work out. And even in sponsored videos, I have to be, objective and unbiased, and I have to disclose my sponsorship, of course. But there's an aspect of credibility that I need to maintain. So if the product is not that great, I'm not going to risk my credibility. I'm not going to say good things about it when it's bad. And I presume the sponsor is not going to want to pay for a video where I say bad things about their product.
Right.
And I make it clear to them as well. In the contract that I have them sign, I have a clause there that says, if this has to be an objective and unbiased review. If I find some negative points, I'm going to share them. But if, however, the global, sentiment after testing this is bad, then that could be grounds for, breaking our contract. Unless you're fine, you want to pay for, a video where I say bad things about your product, then I guess I'm fine too. But I'm just, I need to be transparent about that.
Right.
So I definitely research the product, and I have over 200 videos now, and I have over 20 years of buying a lot of tech and testing them out myself even before YouTube. So I do have a sense of whether a product's going to be good or not. Usually yeah, I wouldn't say completely right, but I'm on the right track. So that definitely goes into whether I accept a particular offer or not.
Gotcha. I'm curious, have you ever had someone pay for a bad product review?
No. Well, I haven't had any product that turned out to be bad. So I've been
Oh, okay.
fortunate to have accepted and been right in my judgment that the product's going to be good. I have had products that had, some negative aspects to them, and I've stated them in my reviews, but I've never had any product that was completely so terrible that, I have to badmouth it on in the video. So yeah.
Gotcha. And speaking of sponsors, have you ever worked with a sponsor or a company that uh, it didn't go so well, like there was bad communication, or have you ever had any really good experiences, like the company just loved you or anything like that?
That's yeah. So I think I had almost all of my experiences were great. I think the sponsorships have been all a great success, both from my side and the company side. They absolutely love the content and the collaboration and the transparency and the communication. But I did have one interesting product where they had reached out to me, and that was in the early days of me starting to get sponsored content. So I was a bit
Hmm.
less flexible well, not flexible, but more open to accepting things because it was amongst the first sponsorship deals that I would get. And they sent me the product. I did a review. Actually, that was for Amazon. They didn't even want it on YouTube. So I did an Amazon affiliate, review, and I sent it to them, and they just ghosted me. They stopped responding.
Oh,
So I, emailed a couple of times, follow up emails, absolutely nothing. But to add insult to injury, about a week later, I got a bill from FedEx in my mailbox with some taxes and duties on that. So the product was sent from outside the EU, and if the company does not take care of the customs and duties and taxes, they have to bill me as the recipient. On top of that,
oh,
there's admin fees and penalties and whatnot. So not only did I not get paid for that content, but I also had an out-of-pocket expense paying for that.
oh no.
Yeah, but I mean, it was hard at first, but then it's the cost of doing business. Fortunately, I that was the only time that happened, and yeah, it wasn't a big deal, but yeah, it was an interesting story.
Yeah, that's did that make you worry about doing sponsorships from then on out? Like, did you kind of vet the companies that you were communicating with after that?
It definitely made me more careful, more prudent in what I accept and not. But fortunately, that was I think about a year and a half ago, and I've had dozens and dozens since then, and yeah, all of them went great. Thank God.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, that totally makes sense. I feel like if I were in that situation, I'd be super skeptical about every sponsorship after that because that would be rough. So I think our listeners will appreciate that. And it's kind of like a learning experience, for those who start to get sponsorships. I bet everyone, maybe not being ghosted, but everyone has experiences with sponsors and
Definitely,
whether
yeah.
they go right or wrong or stuff like that. So